The alarm bells in the cockpit are nothing but a muffled rhythmic heartbeat compared to the roar of 4 Wright Cyclone engines. At 23,000 feet, the air is thin, bitter, and smells of high-octane gasoline and fear. You are sitting in a glass-enclosed coffin, jammed into the extreme tail of a B-17 flying fortress. You can feel every vibration of the aircraft through your boots, a constant rattling protest against the freezing slipstream outside. Suddenly, the radio crackles. It's not a voice. It's the frantic clipped chatter of the interphone. Bandits! 6 o'clock high. 12. Maybe more. You peer through the small frost-rimed windows. There, against the blinding sterile blue of the German sky, the specks appear. They aren't just flying, they are hunting. 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s, silver needles stitching their way toward your formation with lethal geometric precision. They are closing in at 400 miles per hour. Standard procedure dictates you wait. You wait for them to enter your effective range. You wait for the lead fighter to commit. You wait for the order to fire. But in this moment, high above the industrial heart of the Reich, the silence in your ears is deafening, and you realize that waiting is just another way to die. The B-17 flying fortress was never meant to be a solo hunter. It was designed as a fortress, a heavy armored brick intended to survive by flying in dense, interlocking combat boxes where the defensive fire of one bomber covered the blind spots of another. But the Luftwaffe had adapted. By 1944, German interceptors, the agile Bf 109s, and the brutal cannon-heavy Focke-Wulf Fw 190s had mastered the art of the coordinated strike. They didn't just attack, they choreographed chaos. They would approach from the stern, diving from the sun or climbing from the low quarter, forcing the bomber gunners to scramble, to divide their attention, and to bleed their precious ammunition reserves dry. The tail gunner was the most isolated soul in the sky. Cut off from the rest of the crew by the fuselage, shivering in sub-zero temperatures that could turn bare skin to ice, he was the lone sentry at the back door of the bomber. When the fighters moved in, they knew the tail gunner was watching, waiting to be triggered. They played a deadly game of cat and mouse, baiting the gunner into firing too early, forcing him to waste his limited ammunition, then striking the moment he had to reload. But the air war over Europe was changing. The desperate, grinding nature of the combined bomber offensive in the spring of 1944 demanded a new kind of survival. A quiet evolution was taking place in the minds of the men in the tail. It wasn't found in a training manual. It was discovered in the cold, hard logic of the hunt. What if the hunted decided to stop running? What if, instead of waiting for the fighters to dictate the terms of the engagement, the gunner took the initiative? It was a radical, almost suicidal shift in doctrine. Instead of waiting for the fighters to commit to an attack run, a run that usually ended with cannon fire slamming into the bomber's tail, some gunners began to open fire at extreme, improbable ranges. 2,000 yards, 1,500 yards. Ranges where the chance of a direct hit was slim, but the chance of disruption was absolute. Imagine being in the cockpit of a Bf 109. You have your target locked. Your wingmen are perfectly positioned. You are seconds away from the firing solution. Suddenly, the sky erupts in front of you. Tracers, thick and bright, begin to arc through the air, forcing you to blink, to adjust, to dodge. Your formation, once a tight, aggressive unit, begins to waver. You aren't being hit, but you are being hunted. The psychological pressure shifts instantly. The target is no longer a passive, lumbering bomber. It is a creature that bites back. The lead fighter breaks off, not because he's damaged, but because he's lost his momentum. The wingmen hesitate, their concentration fractured by the spray of lead. The coordinated wave disintegrates into a swarm of individual pilots, each forced to react to the gunner rather than executing their own plan. This was the core of the transformation. By firing first, the tail gunner turned a defensive fight into an offensive suppression. It was a gamble of ammunition for time. A gunner might burn through 200 or 300 rounds to break up an attack, but those rounds were cheaper than the cost of a crippled bomber. The Luftwaffe pilots were professionals, trained for disciplined precision strikes. They were not trained to fly through a curtain of fire that started long before they reached their firing position. This aggressive defensive fire began to act like a wall. German after-action reports from mid-1944 started to show signs of frustration. They noted the reckless and unexpected aggression of American gunners who refused to play by the rules of engagement. The tactical landscape had shifted. The combat zone over Germany was the deadliest classroom in history. For the crew of a B-17, the mission was always the same: reach the target, drop the payload, and hope to heaven you make it back to East Anglia. But the reality was a constant attrition. Fighter escorts were improving thanks to the P-51 Mustang, but the bombers were still the bait, and the Luftwaffe was still the shark. In the cramped, vibrating silence of the tail, the gunner had hours to think about the odds. When the encounter finally came, the world shrank down to the sights of the twin M2 Browning machine guns. The cold, the fatigue, the fear, it all evaporated the moment the tracers began to dance. The tracers are a beautiful, terrifying sight. They are the only thing that makes the invisible path of a bullet real. As the gunner walks his fire across the front of the oncoming formation, he is doing something more than shooting. He is carving a space in the sky where the enemy cannot enter. He watches as a Bf-109 pilot, startled by a near miss, kicks his rudder and pulls into a hard defensive bank. The formation shatters. The coordinated attack is dead. The gunner tracks the next target, his pulse steady, his movements mechanical. There is no time for emotion, only the rhythm of the feed, the recoil of the guns, and the smell of the smoke filling the tiny compartment. This wasn't just combat. It was a psychological standoff. By the summer of 1944, the reputation of these aggressive gunners was spreading through German radio frequencies. German pilots reported increased difficulty attacking certain formations. The enemy knew that if they pressed their attack against these specific formations, they would face an unrelenting wall of fire that ignored the safety of range and the caution of ammunition conservation. The bomber, once the prey, had learned how to make the predator bleed. It was a victory of spirit as much as it was a victory of tactics. As the B-17 turns toward home, the sky finally goes quiet. The engines hum a steady, reassuring note. The gunner pulls his hands from the grips, his fingers numb and trembling, the adrenaline slowly receding into a bone-deep exhaustion. He checks his ammo cans. Empty. He has spent every last round, not on guaranteed kills, but on the simple, brutal act of survival. He looks out the window, back toward the distant coast of the continent, and knows that he did more than just fly a mission. He changed the rules of the sky. The history of war is often written in the grand movements of armies and the decisions of generals, but the true story of the 8th Air Force is written in the actions of individuals in the cramped, freezing corners of the sky. It is the story of men who realized that in the face of an enemy who expected them to be victims, the most dangerous thing they could be was aggressive. It is a reminder that freedom, in its most desperate hour, is not just preserved by the iron of the machines, but by the iron in the hearts of those who operate them. These gunners, forgotten by the history books but remembered by every crewman who made it home to his family, proved that the greatest defensive weapon is the will to strike back. They chose to fight, and in doing so, they turned the tide of the war one tracer at a time.